When my adopted daughter found her birth family, she blocked me from attending her college send-off dinner. But when her birth dad asked her to pitch in for the bill, she tried using my bank card and realized everything had changed. The next morning, Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The air in our Georgetown home that summer was thick with the sweet, heavy scent of impending change. It was a tangible thing, a mixture of cardboard from the stacks of moving boxes, the lemony perfume of the wood polish I used on the family heirlooms, and the electric, palpable excitement of my daughter Jordan. At 18, she stood on the precipice of her entire life, and the view was dazzling. Her acceptance letter to Spelman College, her first choice, was framed and sitting on the mantelpiece like a holy relic, a testament to years of hard work, late-night study sessions, and a sharp, inquisitive mind that was my greatest pride. Our bond, forged in the crucible of single motherhood and unconditional love, had always been the central pillar of my life. I had adopted Jordan as an infant, a tiny, perfect being placed in my arms by a social worker who told me, "She's yours now, Dr. Cole." In that moment, my world, once a quiet, orderly universe of academic theory and linguistic texts, had rearranged itself around this new, brilliant son. As a linguistics professor, my life was one of syntax and semantics, but Jordan was my poem, my living, breathing thesis on the boundless nature of love. We were a team, a closed circle of two, navigating the world with an easy, unspoken understanding. That summer was meant to be our final sacred chapter together before the next volume of her life began. It was to be a season of lasts, the last time we'd complain about the DC humidity together on the front porch swing, the last marathon shopping trip to find the perfect dorm room essentials, and the most important tradition of all, our send-off dinner. It was a ritual we had started when she'd graduated from middle school, a shy, gangly 12-year-old overwhelmed by the prospect of high school. I had taken her to the Tabard Inn, a historic, elegant restaurant with a quiet, ivy-walled courtyard. I wanted to give her a memory of adult grace and quiet celebration to hold on to. I remembered that first dinner so clearly. She had been in awe of the candlelight, the heavy linen napkins, and the hushed clink of silverware. The waiter had winked at her that first night, whispering, "This place is magic if you let it be." She'd believed him. That night, I told her that every major milestone, every time she leveled up in life, we would come back to this sut. She was the guest of honor. We came back to celebrate her high school acceptance, her first debate club victory, her 16th birthday. This final dinner before she left for Selman was to be the culmination of it all. A quiet, intimate ceremony to mark the end of her childhood, with me as the proud, tearful witness. The promise of that evening was a warm, steady light, guiding us through the emotional labyrinth of her leaving. The news that would change everything came on a sweltering afternoon in July. I was in my study sorting through books, when Jordan appeared in the doorway, her face lit with a kind of incandescent joy I had never seen before. She was vibrating with an energy that seemed too big for the room, a nervous, triumphant tremor in her hands as she clutched her phone. "I found them, Mom," she whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "My birth family. They want to meet me." My reckless, mothering heart flipped through a dozen emotions at once. There was a surge of genuine happiness for her, a profound sense of relief that this missing piece of her identity, a piece I could never give her, was finally within her grasp. But underneath it, a cold, selfish thread of fear tightened. Our circle of two, the bedrock of my entire adult life, was about to be broken. I had always been honest with Jordan about her adoption. Her story was her own, a sacred text that I was merely the guardian of. From the time she was old enough to understand, I had told her about the brave young woman who had made the difficult choice to give her a life she couldn't provide at the time. I had encouraged her when she felt ready to seek out the answers she needed. With my full support, she had submitted her information to an online ancestry and adoption registry months ago. I had sat beside her at the dining room table as she filled out the forms, my academic mind assisting with the phrasing of her biography while my mother's heart ached with 1,000 unspoken anxieties. I wanted this for her. I truly did. A part of me believed that knowing them would only deepen her appreciation for the life we had built. How naive I was. I pushed aside my own complex feelings and rose from my desk, enveloping her in a hug. "Oh, baby, that's wonderful news," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hoped she would interpret purely as joy. "Tell me everything." And she did, the words tumbling out of her in an excited rush. Her birth father, Darnell Franklin, was a transit supervisor for the city. Her birth mother Temeka had been a teenager when she'd had her and was now married to Darnell. They had 3 other children, her half-siblings. They lived in Silver Spring, just a short drive away. They were a family. A whole complete sprawling family that she was a part of. She showed me their pictures on her phone, a chaotic, vibrant group of people smiling at a barbecue, surrounding a man with a charming, easygoing smile, Darnell. They looked happy. They looked real. And in that moment, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It felt like inadequacy. My quiet academic life, our world of books and museums and whispered conversations, suddenly felt small and pale in comparison to this ready-made clan. Her first meeting with them was a tentative coffee at a neutral location in Silver Spring. I drove her there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I waited in a nearby park, unable to read, unable to think, just staring at my phone, counting the minutes. An hour later she slid back into the passenger seat, looking dazed and ecstatic. "They're so normal, Mom," she said, her eyes shining. "They're loud and they talk over each other and Darnell tells the worst jokes." Temeka cried when she saw me. It was amazing. That coffee turned into a weekend barbecue, an invitation Jordan accepted without a moment's hesitation. I had gently suggested she take it slow, but she looked at me with a flash of annoyance, as if my caution was an attempt to hold her back. "Mom, I've waited my whole life for this," she'd said. "I'm not going to take it slow." She went, and she came back transformed. She was no longer just my daughter, she was a Franklin. Her calendar, once filled with our quiet summer plans, a trip to the Hirshhorn Museum, a final walk around the tidal basin, movie nights on the couch, was now dominated by the Franklins. She was swept up into a whirlwind of new aunts, uncles and cousins who treated her like a returning celebrity. She was the guest of honor, the long-lost princess restored to her kingdom, and she was basking in the warm, intoxicating glow of their constant attention. I tried to be gracious. I listened to her stories, laughed at her descriptions of her boisterous new family, and quietly crossed off the plans I had made for just the 2 of us. But a shift was occurring. A subtle, almost imperceptible tilt in the axis of her world. She started to see her life through their eyes, and suddenly the world she had grown up in, the world I had so carefully built for her, was found wanting. The change was most apparent after a full weekend spent at their house. She came home on Sunday night smelling of charcoal and someone else's perfume. Her usual thoughtful expression replaced with a kind of restless, glittering energy. "It's just so different over there," she said, kicking off her shoes and dropping her overnight bag in the middle of the immaculate hallway. "Nobody cares if the house is perfectly clean. The door is always open. People just drop by. We just hung out on the porch all day listening to old school R&B. It's so real, you know." The implication, of course, was that our home, my home, was not. That my carefully curated life of order, quiet, and intellectual pursuits was somehow artificial. The comment was a small thing, a thoughtless teenage observation, but it stung. Her half-sister Nia, a 16-year-old with Darnell's charming smile and an unnervingly sharp gaze, seemed to be the primary source of this new perspective. Jordan would recount their conversations, not realizing she was parroting Nia's resentful passive-aggressive narrative. "Nia said she can't believe I have my own bathroom," Jordan mentioned one day while we were in the kitchen. She was joking, of course. "She called me the bougie Georgetown princess." Jordan laughed, but it was a brittle sound. She was trying on a new identity, one that cast her old life, my life, as one of privilege and pretense. She was beginning to feel ashamed of the very advantages I had worked my entire life to provide for her. I held my tongue, a difficult and painful act of self-restraint. This was a phase, I told myself, a necessary if excruciating part of her journey. She was navigating 2 worlds, trying to find her place in both. My role was to be her anchor, her safe harbor, the place she could return to when the novelty wore off. I just had to be patient. I just had to wait. And through it all, I held on to the promise of our dinner at the Tabard Inn. That would be our night. A night to reconnect, to remember the foundation upon which her entire life had been built. A night for just us. The conversation that broke my heart happened a week before our reservation. The moving boxes for her dorm room were now stacked high in the living room, a constant physical reminder of her impending departure. I was in the kitchen, carefully wrapping the good china I was sending with her, when Jordan walked in. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She fiddled with the strap of her purse, a nervous energy radiating from her that set my teeth on edge. "Mom," she began, her voice small and tight. "Can we talk for a second?" I put down the dish I was holding. Of course, baby. What is it? She took a deep, shaky breath, the kind you take before delivering bad news. So, the Franklins, Darnell and Temeka, they want to throw a big send-off dinner for me, to celebrate me going to college. It's really important to them. My heart swelled with a genuine warmth, a foolish optimistic relief. How wonderful of them, I said, my voice bright. I had been worried they would feel excluded from this milestone. That's so thoughtful. We should invite them to join us at the Tabard Inn. I can call and see if they can accommodate a larger party. Jordan flinched. No, that's not it. She stammered, finally looking up at me. Her eyes were a mixture of guilt and a stubborn, defensive resolve. They want to do their own thing, at a steakhouse downtown. A big party, for all the relatives. Oh, okay, I said, my smile faltering. Well, that sounds lovely. Just let me know when it is so I can mark my calendar. Jordan looked down at her feet again, her silence a screaming confirmation of my dawning horror. Well, that's the thing, she mumbled. They planned it for Tuesday night. The air left my lungs. Tuesday, the night of our dinner, the night of our sacred 18-year tradition. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she'd told them we already had plans, that they would have to pick another night, that our tradition was non-negotiable. But she didn't. She just stood there, a portrait of guilty, miserable conflict. Jordan, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, we have a reservation at the Tabard Inn, for Tuesday night. I know, she whispered, her voice pleading. I told them that. I did. But, Darnell said it's the only night everyone could make it. He said it's a chance for me to bond with my birth family before I go. He said they think it should just be them. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. Just them. A line had been drawn and I was on the wrong side of it. So, I said, my voice flat, my heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. What are you saying, Jordan? She took another shaky breath, the final devastating blow. Her voice was barely audible. They said you can't come. The world narrowed to a single point of pain. I felt the blood drain from my face. 18 years of my life, of my love, of my sacrifice, from the 3 a.m. feedings to the college application essays I'd stayed up all night, helping her edit, raced in a single cruel sentence. I was not family, I was the other, the outsider. And my daughter, my own daughter, was the one delivering the eviction notice from her new life. I looked at her, at this beautiful, intelligent, wounded young woman I had raised, and I saw the immense, selfish immaturity of her choice. She was so desperate for the approval of these strangers, so dazzled by the fantasy of her new family, that she was willing to shatter the heart of the only mother she had ever known. 1,000 responses flew through my mind. I could yell. I could cry. I could list every sacrifice I had ever made for her, from the career opportunities I'd passed up to the retirement savings I was about to spend on her. But I did none of those things. In that moment of profound, soul-crushing hurt, a strange, cold clarity descended upon me. Yelling would only make me the villain in her new narrative, the jealous, possessive, adoptive mother. Tears would be dismissed as emotional manipulation. So, I retreated. I pulled all my pain, all my anger, all my grief, and I locked it away behind a wall of quiet, unassailable dignity. I would not give her a dramatic scene to recount to her real family. I would give her nothing but the cold, uncomfortable weight of her own decision. I took a slow breath and nodded, my expression a carefully blank mask. I understand, I said. The words were a lie, but they were the only ones I had left. That night, the house sat in a silence so taut it hummed. Jordan had gone out, a quick and guilty escape to a friend's house, leaving me alone with the echoing cruelty of her words. I walked through the rooms of our home, touching the objects that chronicled our life together. The framed photo of us at her kindergarten graduation, her gap-toothed smile shining, the collection of seashells from our trip to the Outer Banks, the worn copy of Goodnight Moon that I had read to her 1,000 times. I was not just a mother who had been uninvited to a dinner. I was a woman whose entire life's work had just been dismissed as a temporary foster placement. The pain was a physical thing, a deep, tearing ache in my chest. I allowed myself to feel it, to sit with it, to let the tears I had held back in front of her finally fall. I grieved for the bond I thought was unbreakable. I grieved for the daughter I felt I was losing. But as the hours ticked by, as the moon rose high in the sky outside my window, the grief began to cool and harden into something else. It was resolve, a quiet, unyielding reckoning. Jordan had made a choice. She had chosen to step out from under the umbrella of my protection, my provision, my unconditional support, and into a new family, with its own set of rules and expectations. She wanted to be one of them. She wanted to be an adult. Very well then, it was time I started treating her like one. Adulthood, I knew, was not just about freedom. It was about responsibility. It was about consequences. I went into my study and turned on my computer. My movements were calm, deliberate, devoid of the emotional storm that was raging inside me. I opened my online banking portal. For 18 years, Jordan and I had shared a joint checking account. It was the account my salary was deposited into. The account from which all our bills were paid. She had a debit card linked to it. A card she had used for everything from school lunches to shopping sprees. It was in her mind a bottomless well of resources, a symbol of our shared life. I had always planned to separate our finances when she went to college. It was a practical step, a lesson in budgeting and independence. I had intended to do it with her, to sit down together and walk her through the process, a joint lesson in financial literacy. Now, I did it alone. The process felt funereal. Each click of the mouse was a small death, the severing of a tie that had bound us together for her entire life. I opened a new student checking account in her name, a simple no-frills account with a major bank. I looked at the letter from Spelman confirming her full 4-year academic scholarship, a fact that made me swell with pride. My primary responsibility was not tuition but everything else that would make her life comfortable and secure. I arranged the payments for her housing, her books and her first generous monthly stipend for personal expenses, ensuring she'd want for nothing beyond her own judgment. Then came the final painful step. I navigated to the page for our old joint account. My finger hovered over the options menu. I thought of her at 12, her face glowing in the candlelight at the Tabard Inn. I thought of her as a baby, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. A wave of grief so powerful it almost made me close the laptop washed over me. But then I thought of her face in the kitchen, her eyes full of guilt, but also a stubborn, defiant resolve to choose them over me, and my own resolve hardened. I clicked on card services. I found her debit card, the one linked to our old joint account. I selected the option to report the card as lost. A pop-up window appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently deactivate this card? This action cannot be undone. I took a deep breath and clicked confirm. I closed the laptop. The act was done. I hadn't cut her off. I hadn't punished her out of spite. I had simply drawn a line, a boundary. I had converted my role from the all-providing bank of mom into the supportive but separate entity of a parent to an adult child. Her safety net was still there, but the blank check of her childhood had just been voided. She was on her own now, in more ways than one. She just didn't know it yet. The night of the dinner was the longest of my life. I sat in my quiet house, the silence a stark contrast to the boisterous celebration I imagined was taking place across town. I pictured Jordan, my Jordan, laughing and smiling, bathed in the warm, approving glow of her new family. That stubborn organ, the one that insists on feeling in poetry not prose, fluttered again with a painful mix of love and loss. I had wanted this for her, this sense of belonging. I had just never imagined it would come at my expense. Meanwhile, at a flashy, overpriced steakhouse downtown, Jordan was living a dream. The steakhouse air was overchilled, scented with charred meat and lemon-polished wood, as if luxury could be bottled. The Franklins had turned out in force. Darnell, her birth father, sat at the head of the long table, a charismatic, charming king holding court. He introduced Jordan to a sprawling network of aunts, uncles and cousins, each one greeting her with a hug and a loud, enthusiastic welcome. She was the centerpiece of the celebration, the bright jewel everyone angled their chairs toward. The atmosphere was electric. Darnell told terrible, corny jokes that made everyone roar with laughter. Temeka, her birth mother, kept squeezing her hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and old sadness. For the first time, Jordan didn't feel like an only child from a quiet academic home. She felt like a part of something big, something real, something she had been missing her entire life without even knowing it. Her half-sister Nia sat beside her, her earlier resentment replaced by a kind of reflected glory. "Everybody's so proud of you," Nia said, leaning in. "Dad's been telling everyone his daughter is going to the best HBCU in the country." Jordan felt a surge of warmth. This was what she had craved. This easy, unconditional acceptance. This sense of belonging to a tribe. She pushed the lingering guilt about me to the back of her mind. This was different. This was family. The conversation, however, was laced with an undercurrent she was too dazzled to fully recognize. There were jokes about her being the rich one now. Darnell talked about how tight money was, how he was working overtime just to keep up with the bills for his other kids. An uncle mentioned his car had broken down and he didn't know how he was going to afford the repairs. It was all presented as casual family chatter, but it was a subtle, persistent test. They were gauging her, seeing where she fit into the family's ecosystem of needs and resources. Finally, after a parade of appetizers, enormous steaks, and elaborate desserts, the moment of truth arrived. The waiter placed a thick, leather-bound check presenter in the exact center of the table. A sudden, expectant silence fell over the group. The bill for a party of 15 at an expensive steakhouse was astronomical. Darnell let the silence hang for a long, dramatic moment. He cleared his throat, a theatrical sound that drew all eyes to him. He beamed at Jordan, a wide, proud, patriarchal smile. "All right, college girl," he said, his voice booming with a false generosity. "Welcome to the Franklin family. We all pitch in here, it's what we do." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land with perfect precision. "Why don't you get this one for us?" The request, phrased as an honor, was a command. It was her initiation fee into the tribe, a test of her loyalty and her resources. For a moment the numbers scrawled on the check made her throat tighten. It was a sum that belonged in a mortgage office, not on a dinner bill, a figure that far exceeded any check she had ever seen. But pride, a desperate, powerful pride, surged higher than fear. This was her chance. Her chance to prove she wasn't the bougie Georgetown princess. Her chance to show them she was one of them, a Franklin ready and willing to contribute. If she signed without flinching, she would prove herself. She straightened her shoulders, clung to that intoxicating thought, and reached for her purse. She smiled back at Darnell, a confident, adult smile. "Of course," she said, her voice clear and steady. With a flourish of pride she extracted the familiar debit card. The card I had given her when she was 16. The card that had never, not once, failed her. She handed it to the waiter with a sense of profound, triumphant satisfaction. "Here you go," she said. In that moment she was not a child. She was a provider, a contributing member of her new family. The feeling was intoxicating. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes, took the card and disappeared. The conversation around the table resumed, but it was different now. The family was watching her with a new level of respect. Darnell was beaming, his approval a warm, validating glow. Jordan felt like she had passed the most important test of her life. She had arrived. A few minutes later the waiter returned. He did not have a receipt for her to sign. His face was a mask of professional discomfort. He moved silently to Jordan's side and leaned down, his voice a low, mortified whisper that was somehow audible to everyone at the now silent table. "I'm so sorry, miss," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. "This card has been deactivated. It's no longer valid for transactions." The words hit Jordan like a physical blow. A hot, trickling wave of mortified heat washed over her face. It wasn't possible. It was a mistake. "What?" she said, her voice a strangled squeak. "That's impossible. My mom is a professor at Georgetown. There's plenty of money. Run it again." Her voice was a little too loud, a little too defensive. The waiter looked even more uncomfortable. "I did, miss. I ran it twice. The system says the card has been permanently deactivated by the bank." Deactivated? The word made no sense. It was their card, hers and mine. It couldn't be deactivated. Darnell's welcoming smile had completely vanished. It was replaced by a look of cold, hard disappointment. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice losing all its earlier warmth. He wasn't looking at his long-lost daughter anymore. He was looking at a financial liability. Naya, from across the table, did not bother to hide her smirk. "Guess the Bank of Mom is closed tonight," she said, her voice dripping with a triumphant, spiteful pleasure. The other relatives, who had been looking at her with such pride just moments before, now stared with a mixture of suspicion and pity. The magic of the evening, her perfect, triumphant initiation, had shattered into a million pieces of public, humiliating failure. She was no longer the spellman-bound star. She was a fraud, a little girl playing dress-up with a useless piece of plastic. The rest of the evening was a waking nightmare. Utterly humiliated, Jordan had to sit in stunned silence as Darnell and the other men at the table begrudgingly pulled out their wallets, grumbling under their breath about the unexpected expense. The easy, laughing camaraderie was gone, replaced by a tense, resentful silence. Darnell shot her a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance, as if she had personally tricked him, as if she had promised them a feast and then revealed the plates were empty. The party broke up quickly after that. There were no more warm hugs, no more proud pronouncements about their Spellman girl. The goodbyes were curt and awkward. Jordan was no longer an asset. She was an embarrassment. As she stood on the sidewalk, waiting for the rideshare she had called with the last few dollars in her Venmo account, she felt a loneliness so profound it was like a physical ache. She had traded her mother's unwavering love for the conditional, transactional approval of strangers, and in her first test of loyalty she had failed. She had never felt less like she belonged anywhere in her entire life. The ride home was silent, the city lights blurring past the window through her tears. She walked into the house she had grown up in, the house that had always been her sanctuary, and it felt like a foreign country. A single lamp was on in the study, casting a warm golden glow into the hallway. I was in my favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on my nose. I looked up when she entered, expression calm and unreadable. I didn't ask how the dinner was. I didn't ask why she was late. I simply looked at her and returned to my book. The quiet pressed in like unspilled water. It was not a peaceful quiet, but a loud ringing silence, filled with the unspoken weight of her choices. She had chosen this. She had chosen them, and this was the result. She crept up the stairs to her room, the silence of the house pressing in on her, the weight of her own cruelty a suffocating presence in the dark. Jordan was still in her room, curled in a ball of shame when she heard the banging. It wasn't a knock. It was a hard, aggressive pounding on the front door that rattled the old house. It was nearly midnight. She heard my soft footsteps. Then the sound of the front door opening, a man's voice, loud and angry, filled the quiet house. It was Darnell. "What kind of game are you playing?" he yelled, his voice stripped of all its earlier charm. "You set my daughter up. You embarrassed my entire family." Jordan crept to the top of the stairs, her heart pounding. She could see us in the entryway below. I stood there calm and composed in my silk robe, a stark contrast to Darnell's furious, imposing figure. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Franklin," I said, my voice the cool, level tone of a professor addressing a disruptive student. "Don't play dumb with me," he spat. "That card you gave Jordan, it was declined. We all had to scramble to pay for that ridiculous dinner. You did that on purpose to make us look bad, didn't you? This is how you rich folks get your kicks, looking down on the rest of us." I did not flinch. "My financial arrangements with my daughter are frankly none of your business," I said. "Jordan is an adult. If she commits to a financial obligation, it is her responsibility to handle it. She's a kid," Darnell roared. "She thought she was using a family account. Your account. You think it's right to humiliate her like that?" "What I think," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "is that it is not right to invite a guest of honor to a celebration and then demand she pay for the entire party. You didn't see her as a daughter in that moment, Mr. Franklin. You saw her as a wallet. You wanted to see what the Georgetown princess was worth, and you were disappointed with the answer." The truth of the statement hit him with the force of a slap. He was momentarily speechless. "My daughter's worth," I continued, my voice like steel, "is not measured by the balance of my bank account. Her worth is in her intelligence, her kindness, and her character. Qualities that seem to have been in short supply at your dinner this evening." Darnell, recovering, pointed a finger at me. "You owe us that money. We had to cover her because of you." I actually let out a small, dry laugh. "I owe you nothing. You threw a party you couldn't afford and tried to stick an 18-year-old with the bill. That is a failure of your own planning, not a debt I am required to pay. Now it is very late. I suggest you go home." I began to close the door. He put his hand out to stop it. "This isn't over." "Oh, I assure you," I said, looking at his hand on my door with disdain before meeting his eyes with a final, dismissive glare. "It is." I closed the door firmly in his face, the click of the deadbolt echoing in the silent hall. Jordan remained at the top of the stairs, trembling. She had just witnessed the man she was so desperate to impress reveal himself to be a bully and a mooch, and she had seen the quiet, unshakable strength of the mother she had betrayed. The contrast was a brutal, clarifying revelation. The last vestiges of her fantasy crumbled into dust. The next morning the sun rose on a world that felt gray and broken. Jordan lay in bed for a long time, the humiliation of the previous night replaying in a relentless loop. The waiter's whisper, Darnell's cold stare, Mia's triumphant smirk. It was a gallery of her own failure, but underneath the shame, something else was taking root. a deep, aching grief for what she had so carelessly thrown away. She finally forced herself out of bed and went downstairs. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. I was in the kitchen, dressed in my usual Saturday morning uniform, comfortable yoga pants and a university sweatshirt, calmly watering my orchids. I didn't look up when Jordan entered. Jordan stood in the doorway, a ghost in her own home, feeling like a stranger. The silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. A word she had said 1,000,000 times in her life, felt foreign and undeserved on her tongue. I finished watering my last orchid before I turned, my face calm and composed. I looked at my daughter, at the tear-streaked face and the slumped, defeated shoulders, and my expression held no anger, only a deep, profound sadness. And then, the dam broke. Jordan crumpled, her carefully constructed teenage pride dissolving into a torrent of ugly, broken sobs. "I'm sorry," she cried, the words torn from the deepest part of her. "Oh my God, Mom, I am so sorry. I was so stupid, I was so cruel, I hurt you, and I am so sorry." She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame the Franklins. She didn't try to justify her actions. She owned her betrayal completely. She told me everything, about how she had gotten so swept up in the fantasy of this new family. How she had been so desperate for their approval that she had been willing to sacrifice anything, anyone, to get it. She confessed how Mia's words had gotten into her head, making her feel ashamed of the quiet, wonderful life we had built together. And she described the dinner, the humiliation and the dawning, horrific realization that their affection was conditional, that she was not a daughter to them but an opportunity. "They didn't love me," she whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "They just loved what they thought you could give them through me. You're the only one who has ever really loved me, and I threw that away, for nothing." I listened patiently, my expression never changing. I let her pour out all her shame, all her regret, all her pain. I let the silence sit for a long moment after Jordan had finished, letting the weight of the confession settle in the room. Finally, I spoke. My voice was not the angry, wounded voice of a betrayed mother. It was the calm, measured voice of a professor, of a woman who dealt in facts and logic. "I didn't cut you off, Jordan," I said quietly. "I made you an adult." I walked over to the kitchen table and picked up a thick manila folder that had been sitting there. I handed it to Jordan. "That joint account was for raising a child. You are an 18-year-old woman now, about to go to college. It was time for you to have your own financial life. My love for you is unconditional, but access to my life savings is not. That is a boundary every adult learns to respect." Jordan's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside, the folder wasn't empty. It was plump with documents, the top page a clear confirmation of her full 4-year scholarship. I had arranged payments for housing, books and her allowance, ensuring she'd want for nothing beyond her own judgment. There was a detailed, color-coded budget for her first year of college, outlining her expected expenses and income. It wasn't a punishment, it was a lesson, an incredibly painful, deeply necessary lesson in responsibility, accountability and the true meaning of support. I hadn't abandoned her. I had empowered her. I had given her the tools to be an independent woman, not the dependent child the Franklins had wanted her to be. The lesson was clear. I will give you everything you need to build your own life, but I will no longer be the bank that funds the lives of others through you. A few days before Jordan was scheduled to fly to Atlanta, she found me in the study. Her voice was small, hesitant. "Mom?" she asked. Do you think the Tabard Inn might still have a table available for Tuesday night? Just us." My heart, the foolish maternal organ I thought had been shattered beyond repair, felt a flicker of warmth. "I'll make the call," I said. Our dinner was not the triumphant, celebratory affair we had originally planned. It was quieter, more somber, and infinitely more meaningful. We sat in the familiar, beautiful courtyard, the candlelight flickering between us. We talked for hours. Jordan asked me for the first time about the day I adopted her. She asked about my fears, my hopes, the challenges of being a single mother. She was not just my daughter anymore. She was a young woman trying to understand my journey. And I saw her, really saw her, not as the child I had raised but as the adult she was becoming, an adult who had made a terrible mistake, who had learned a brutal lesson, and who was now trying to find her way back. As we were leaving, walking through the quiet, historic lobby, Jordan stopped and turned to me. "Thank you, Mom," she said, her eyes shining with an emotion that was deeper and more mature than any I had seen in them before. Thank you for everything. For the 18 years, for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. Our bond had not been broken. It had been tested, stretched to its absolute limit. And it had held. It was different now. Reforged in the fire of this painful summer. It was stronger, more honest, and built on a new, more profound understanding. As I watched her walk through the security gate at the airport a few days later, her Spellman sweatshirt seemed too big, yet it glowed like armor as she joined the slow shuffle toward the checkpoint. I knew she would be okay. She was leaving home with more than just an allowance and a dorm room key. She was leaving with the hard-won knowledge that family isn't just about blood. It's about the quiet, unwavering love that shows up, no questions asked, for 18 years. It's about the person who gives you not just what you want, but what you need to become the person you were meant to be. And that was a lesson no one could ever take away from her.